Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 201, cover dated January 1986. A striking cover here by Rick Leonardi and Whilce Portacio inking him, featuring Cyclops versus Storm and the cover caption, "Who will lead them?" And also note the corner box here with the big question mark and the heads of Cyclops and Storm, and the big question is who is going to lead the Uncanny X-Men into the future. So let's open this one up to the splash page, and this picks up from the end of the previous issue where the X-Men were in Paris for the trial of Magneto, and they have now returned home to Westchester, New York, and the X-Mansion. And in the previous issue we saw Madelyne Pryor go into labor, and so she's given birth to her baby, and it is a son, as it turns out. So we've got all the X-Men team there gathered around Madelyne and the baby, and we've got some interesting expressions on Cyclops' face, as he's looking away, and Rachel, of course, looking with some concern about the baby, because of course it isn't her, and she's from an alternative timeline where she was the child of Scott Summers and Jean Grey. So let's continue with this. We've got a fairly packed couple of pages here. This is, generally speaking, one of Claremont's quiet type issues. So there's a lot of character moments and emotional drama here. And the primary emotional drama is Madelyne's, in terms of her concern about why Cyclops wasn't in contact with her after the X-Men got back from Asgard and were in Paris. Other team members like Kitty phoned her to see how she was getting on, but Cyclops didn't. And we can see him standing apart from the team and from Madelyne and the baby. So what she says is, if we turn over the page here, when she gets into the conversation properly with Storm, she says, "In the beginning, it was like a storybook, complete with the classic ending, they lived happily ever after. Scott came back to the X-Men because he felt he was needed. I followed from our own home in Alaska because I wanted us to be together for the birth of our child. He and the X-Men went off to Asgard to rescue you, and I was left on my own. No problem, I coped, always have, always will. But then you all returned, materializing in France, for heaven's sake. And Kitty phoned, you phoned, almost everyone called to see how I was, except my husband. Not a word, not a peep. He had more important things on his mind. I gave birth to my son on this floor. I was lucky. Almost before I realized I was in labor, I had the baby in my arms. I reached the hospital, everything was all right. But it could have been different." And Ororo's reply is interesting because it's sympathetic to Scott and his character. He's a very private man. Such feelings are hard for him to face, much less reveal, but they are there, Madelyne. He does love you very much. And she responds, "That's what I thought. Now though, Ororo, more and more I find myself asking for proof." And this is all in connection with the question of whether Cyclops is going to rejoin the X-Men and be team leader or not, because he had been away for a while, since I think Uncanny X-Men 176, and had only turned up again in 199. Anyway, we get this nice little quiet moment here between Kitty and Rachel and the baby. We don't learn the baby's name until Inferno, but this is Nathan Christopher, and this is, retrospectively then, it turns out, the first appearance of Cable in this particular issue. So I remember when I was reading the X-Men comics back in the early 90s, this was an expensive issue on the back issue market because of that counting as Cable's first appearance. And Cable was a hot, popular character in the early 90s in particular. And this is a nice little moment here where Ray asks Kitty whether she would like to hear the baby's thoughts and that she'll silence us to them. And there you get this moment where somehow or other they're getting into the baby's pre-linguistic thoughts. An interesting moment And then of course Ray says that she'll have to tell Cyclops that she is his daughter, but she's here thinking to herself, I never had a brother in my timeline. The future era I came from, the world was harsh and cruel and it killed mutants. This world, this timeline, your future baby boy is going to be different. I'll protect you, whatever it takes. I'll find a way to save you. And then we go to the boy's father here and his own thoughts. So he's left the X-Mansion, he's by himself, and he's thinking, I'm a father, I have a son. And then he's concerned about why Professor X isn't there to share that joy with him. And he's still focused on Professor X and the whole business of Magneto replacing him. So Cyclops there kind of focused on his identity as an X-Man, as X-Men team leader, his whole career as an X-Men, and he's kind of in this rite of passage moment where maybe he should be more focused on his son rather than Professor X. He should be moving on, yes, is an implication of what's going on here in the story. And then we switch to a galaxy far, far away, and the Starjammer, which has taken damage from being pursued by Shi'ar Empire ships, because Deathbird is the Empress of the Shi'ar Empire, and Lilandra is the leader of the rebels. And we can see that Professor X has been fixed up by Sikorsky. That's what happened at the end of the previous issue. He was transported aboard the Starjammer through a Stargate, and so he's back to full health. And then it turns out the damage the ship has taken means that it may be impossible to go back to Earth. As Corsair says to him, I'm sorry, Charles, but there's no way we can take you home. Not now, maybe not ever. And of course, interesting that Corsair is turning up here, because Corsair is Cyclops' father and was not involved in his son's life after the plane crash, and was away, in that galaxy far, far away aboard the Starjammer, all those years when Scott was in an orphanage. So the big question is Scott going to be present for his baby, or is he going to put duty and his life as an X-Man before family? Interesting how that theme is there implicitly in who we're seeing and what's going on in this issue. And then it turns out like Professor X is concerned about the students, what will become of them, whether it was a good idea to put Magneto in charge. But basically his solace and prospective happy ending is his students now will have to fend for themselves, but he's got his beloved Lilandra, and they have each other, even if they're millions and millions of light years from Earth. And then we switch back to the school, headed up now by Magneto, and we've got Cannonball there, Sam Guthrie, turning in a term paper on the Soviet Union. So the USSR still a going concern in 1985-86. And the computer basically crashes, and he's disgusted that he's lost his work. And then we switch outside to this baseball game. So this is a kind of like a trope of Claremont's, that when the X-Men have some downtime, they like to play baseball. So we've got Kitty throwing the ball towards its Colossus on base, pitching the ball. That's the language for baseball. I don't know too much about the game really. And so we have the game going on here, and a bit of characterization going on in terms of Nightcrawler wondering to Wolverine whether they should get involved in the family tangle of Scott, Madelyne, and Rachel. But Wolverine's opinion is to leave well enough alone and let them sort it out themselves. So then back to the game, and Kitty throws a fastball at Colossus, who transforms into his metallic self and whacks that ball into the atmosphere. And then Rogue goes after it, and then we get this interesting little comic piece here. So he only turned up a few issues ago, Ronald Reagan, it was Mystique though, who was morphed into his form, and now here he really is aboard Air Force One, and catching sight of Rogue outside, and she goes up and smooches the window. So now we know that Rogue is a Republican and would have been a voter for Ronald Reagan. That may be the implication of this little scene. And then we go back to the end of the game. Kitty's heading in to wash up, but she comes through the room where Sam is working away. Well, he's still disgusted at losing his term paper, and she promises him, because she's a computer whiz, that she'll have the computer up and running in a jiffy. But it turns out it's much, much later, so it took quite some time to sort out the mess. And then we have this little bit with Aurora and Kitty, where Aurora is saying don't go up into the attic loft, because she's left it to Madelyne and Scott to have a serious conversation, and they seem to be having a bit of a fight because there's some yelling going on. And if we continue here, we get that conversation between them where it is all about the question of their future together, and that it is their responsibility to look after the baby, how Madelyne has skills as a pilot to fly, and how Scott feels that he has a responsibility to the X-Men. And Madelyne's reply to him is, listen to yourself. Are you saying you and you alone are absolutely essential to the X-Men's survival? Or are you afraid they really can get along without you? In your life so hollow? Is your life so hollow? Your sense of self-worth so fragile that you believe you're nothing without them? What about me? What about us? My commitment to you precludes everything. Are you telling me the same doesn't hold true in reverse? So Scott here really under pressure to make a decision about whether he's going to put the X-Men first or his family first. And then Storm interrupts, and she's got a suggestion that one of them must lead, and the best way to choose is a duel. You and I, Cyclops, alone in the danger room, unless of course you would rather step aside. So he says no, and so we're going to have that duel. I like this page. So Claremont making the decision, the wise decision to pull back and leave this silence here between Scott and Madelyne. And also we've got from Leonardi this panel break. This could be one panel, but he's chosen to put a gutter between Scott and Madelyne, so that really implies the division between them at this point, as does Aurora coming in between Scott and Madelyne here too. So nice storytelling by Leonardi, and nice inks by Portacio as well on this particular issue. I like the way he's rendered the light coming in Storm's loft here as she goes down to take part in the duel. So then we switch to the danger room, and the New Mutants have been involved in a training exercise. And we've got Magneto here involved too. So he's acting in his new role as headmaster of the school, and the New Mutants, their mentor. And then Cyclops interrupts the training session, saying that Storm and he need the room, so the New Mutants exit. And with a little bit of protest from Sunspot here. And then Cypher boots up a program appropriate for the duel between Cyclops and Aurora. And I like the way that Leonardi has rendered them here at opposite ends of the danger room. So the New Mutants are all gathered around, and a few of the X-Men too, to see this duel and how it's going to pan out in terms of who the new leader will be. So let's see. So this is the environment that Douglas Cypher has picked out for them. So it's kind of like a ruined Midtown Manhattan. We've got the Twin Towers probably there in the background. And Storm thinks that this is an environment that equalizes the duel for them, because Storm, of course, at this point doesn't have any powers, and Cyclops does. So she thinks Cyclops' optic blasts are his advantage. This environment you created is mine. We are evenly matched. So Cyclops uses his blast. He's a little bit confident here. I'll make this short and sweet, but she dodges the blast and then disappears into the shadows. So Cyclops can't get a clear shot, a decent shot, as he thinks. So then this is a nice bit of storytelling as well, where if you pay attention, Aurora takes off her belt and she uses it to trip up Cyclops here. So nice couple of silent panels. And again, Claremont wisely hanging back from over-dialoguing this, giving a real sense of the concentration of the characters, but also showing us at this particular point how distracted Cyclops is with the life decision that he's facing. Why doesn't Madelyne understand? I have a duty, but to her, suppose she's right. Am I so afraid? The professor was always more than my father. More my father than my real father. Shouldn't a son naturally want to take his father's place? So he's working through all these thoughts, all these kind of rite of passage thoughts, and it's distracting him from the duel. So Storm begins to get the upper hand here, and the duel continues, where she is in the shadows, creeping up behind him, and he has really lost strategic advantage here. He doesn't know where she is or what she's going to do, because he's so distracted and daydreaming, as he says himself. And then we go back to Madelyne and the baby. And interesting here that suddenly there's a storm that comes out of nowhere. Where did this storm come from, she thinks. And this is an implication maybe that Storm, despite the fact that she's lost her powers, may still subconsciously have some kind of connection with the weather, which is her usual arena of control. And then she leaps at Cyclops, and here we go. She grabs the ruby quartz visor from his head, and that leaves him helpless, because should he open his eyes, he will have no means of controlling his optic blasts. So the duel is over, and as he concedes, the best X-Man won. So Storm now will be leader, and Cyclops is nonplussed. I don't believe it. I'm dreaming. This isn't happening. I lost. I don't like it, but I'll have to learn to live with it. There's no more place for me here. I wonder, after all I've said and done, if there's any now with Madelyne. So that is the end of Cyclops as X-Man leader. And here's what was going on in the background. Jim Shooter editorially mandated a new title for the original X-Men, that is X Factor. So the very next month, X Factor #1 is published, and Scott is back there with the revived, emerging from the cocoon in Jamaica Bay, Jean Grey, the Jean Grey who never became Dark Phoenix, and of course Beast, Iceman, and Angel. So Claremont, in some sense, is tying up Cyclops' relationship with the X-Men and Professor X before he moves into this new team role. And but all of that happening because of Jim Shooter's decision to create this new title, and Claremont therefore forced, in some sense, to deal with that in respect of Madelyne and Scott's relationship here in this particular issue, and moving Scott out of the X-Men and the possibility of being leader of the X-Men. And then we get our epilogue here at the home of John and Elaine Grey, that's Jean Grey's parents, where Rachel has returned. She broke the hollow empathic crystal back in Uncanny X-Men 199, and she's back to fix it and include also her own essence, a portion of her own essence within the hollow empathic crystal. So now you've got Jean Grey as Phoenix and Rachel as Phoenix in the crystal. And then we go to the very last page, and this is an interesting one with the Watcher turning up. And the last time I think that we saw the Watcher in an X-Men comic was back in Uncanny X-Men 137, that classic Death of Phoenix issue. So here he is in a back alley on the moon, where the point at which Jean Grey sacrificed herself to save the universe. And this energy that looks rather like the Phoenix shoots off. Where to? Towards Earth, maybe? And the Watcher says it begins. But as to the ending, who can say? As before, I may not act. My charge is ever to observe, for I am the Watcher. So what is going on here? Claremont implying something about the rebirth of Jean, who in Byrne's Fantastic Four 286 is the Jean Grey that never became Dark Phoenix. So what is going on here with this energy? Is it a portion of Dark Phoenix? We don't know. So then Rachel kisses goodbye to her grandparents, and she says that she is hoping that because of what she's done with the crystal, she'll be remembered. And what is she going to do next? Well, she's going to slay the Beyonder, and that's the next issue. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 201. If you did so, please like the video, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.